So, the head of the UN's nuclear watchdog agency says President Trump's Iran strikes effectively destroyed the country's Fordow nuclear facility, saying it, quote, is no longer operational, and that Iran's nuclear program has suffered, quote, enormous damage. The IAEA came to that conclusion despite not being able to physically access the site. But what about the enriched uranium, all 880 pounds of it? The agency's director general says that Iran most likely moved the stockpile before the strikes, possibly to a site near Isfahan. That's the theory that the president and the secretary of defense have both flat out rejected. They say no uranium was removed from any of the facilities before the strikes. If the Iranian regime still has that uranium, what kind of threat might that pose, even if Iran no longer has the facilities to enrich it further? For more on this, I'm joined by Laura Holgate, who's a former U.S. ambassador to the International Atomic Energy Agency. Thanks so much for joining us. So, first of all, how difficult or easy is it to move that much uranium if, in fact, it was moved?
Well, the uranium is stored in canisters that are kind of the size of a scuba tank. They're very heavy because the uranium is obviously much denser than the air that you would have in a scuba tank. But they could be, portable, put in the trunk of a car. And we saw all of the trucks that were lined up there. I heard the earlier segment with Norm Rule, who pointed out that we don't know what those trucks were doing. Were they bringing things in? Were they taking things out? There was a lot of reason for Iran to expect that Fordow might be bombed, so they might well have taken advantage of that warning time to move the material.
That's certainly what Rafael Grossi, who's the current head of the IAEA, says. He says actually that the Iranians told him they were taking, quote, protective measures because President Trump was telegraphing, if you don't negotiate, if you don't agree to give up your nukes, we're going to bomb you. They knew that this was hanging over them. So do you agree with his assessment?
Well, I take at face value that that's what the Iranians told him, and I think it would be a logical move for them to take that step.
And how long can they just store 880 pounds of enriched uranium and hide it? I mean, is it difficult to hide? You said it's in a scuba tank, but that's a lot of scuba tanks, yes?
Not necessarily that many. Recall, uranium is super dense. So for the space it takes up, it's really, really heavy. So you could put a lot of it in those, each scuba tank, but you have to be careful not to put in too much so it doesn't cause a chain reaction.
What can the Iranians do if they have this uranium secretly hidden someplace, if they don't have the centrifuges to enrich it?
Well, the centrifuges are one thing, and that they may have centrifuges elsewhere in the country that were not declared, that we don't know about. Some kind of a hidden facility. When the Iranians stopped complying with the JCPOA, with the Iran deal, we lost track of their enrichment construction capability. The IAEA was watching that and monitoring that. They haven't been able to have eyes on that for 5 years or so. So we don't know, and Iran is not required to report what kind of supply chain or capability they have to manufacture uranium, to manufacture centrifuges.
Is that an easy thing to hide, to have centrifuges or enrichment facilities?
Yes, they hid it successfully, the first one, for almost 20 years.
Rafael Grossi also said that the centrifuges at Fordow are, quote, no longer operational. How does he know that? Is that just from satellite imagery? Because we know that nobody from his team has managed to get access to the site. I don't think anybody's had access to the site except for perhaps the Iranians.
Yes, I think the issue is the fragility of the centrifuges once they are spinning. Once you turn them on, they spin, at very fast speeds, and the equipment is extremely fragile. And so just the sheer rocking of those facilities that would happen with those kinds of weapons, the seismic shock to the rock that they're embedded in, the interruption perhaps of electricity, all of those could have caused the centrifuges to either stop spinning and kind of fling apart, or they could knock into each other and cause a series of crashes of these centrifuges. So it's a logical extrapolation based on the fragility of centrifuges and how they operate, that a shock of the kind that happened at Fordow would make them unusable.
Yeah, just a disruption in electricity, if that's going to blow the centrifuges, I'm pretty sure 6 bunker-busting bombs, I can't even fathom how they would survive them, but I'm not a nuclear engineer or an expert like yourself. I did want to ask you that the Iranian parliament late yesterday passed a bill that would stop all cooperation with the IAEA. It's now up to the president of Iran to decide whether or not to sign it, but he's largely ceremonial. What do you read into this, and how disturbing is that they might just go completely underground, a la North Korea?
Well, I think it's a quite disturbing prospect. I think it's important not to overread this. It's the legislation called for a pause on cooperation with the IAEA, and that would be kind of a reasonable thing for them to do, given that they don't, they haven't probably satisfied themselves as to the status of the existing facilities and, kind of where they want to go. It's not an encouraging sign at all, however. You'd want them to say instead, we will invite the IAEA back into these facilities as they are legally required to do, as soon as they're safe, as soon as the inspectors can be protected in these facilities that have been quite damaged. So I think there's some logic to it. It may be a symbolic pause that they're showing their displeasure, but it could also be the signal of an effort to away entirely from the IAEA inspections that they've been having.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.